The night air at Willow Creek usually smells of pine and damp earth, but that night, all I smelled was fear. My son Owen had been gone 3 months, and I was outside trying to walk off the quiet grief that still clung to me. Then I heard it, the low, careful engine of a car where no car should be after dark. When the headlights cut through the fog, I recognized the shape instantly. It was Monique's sedan. She pulled into the small dirt turnout near the old pier, not bothering to kill the lights immediately. They cut 2 harsh white beams across the water, illuminating the thick reeds in the fog hovering low over the lake. I dropped behind a scrub oak. Monique never came here. Nobody came here unless they were hiding something. I didn't know why I was hiding. Maybe a mother's instinct. That dull, constant ache of awareness was ringing an alarm bell deep in my chest. I watched her movements. They were too efficient, too rigid for a casual late-night drive. She didn't just park. She positioned the car perfectly, using the dense tree line to shield her from the main road. Every few seconds, she turned her head, checking the rear-view mirror with a tense jerk. Her fingers drummed a rapid staccato beat on the steering wheel, a nervous rhythm that felt miles away from the composed, gentle woman she'd played at Owen's funeral. She finally killed the engine. The sudden silence was heavy, only broken by the distant croak of a bullfrog. Monique opened the trunk. The noise of the latch seemed deafening in the still air. She rustled out a large brown leather suitcase. It wasn't one of her sleek modern travel cases. This one was old, worn, and heavy, the kind Owen had carried back and forth from college. It was bulky, and she struggled with its weight. Her whole posture, the set of her shoulders, the strain in her arms, spoke of desperation. She wasn't carrying luggage. She was carrying a burden she needed to dispose of immediately. She dragged the suitcase to the water's edge. The leather scraped against the gravel path, a sound like tearing fabric. For a moment she just stood there, staring at the lake. The moonlight, weak as it was, caught the sheen of sweat on her forehead despite the cool air. She took a deep, shuddering breath, the kind you take right before committing to something irreversible. I felt a tightening in my own throat, a physical manifestation of the dread pooling in my stomach. I should have turned away, but something told me that suitcase carried my son's ghost. She lifted the case, swinging it with a clumsy, forced momentum. It hit the water with a muffled, explosive splash. The ripples spread quickly, catching the silver light before being swallowed by the darkness. The case didn't sink right away. It floated, stubbornly resisting the dark pull of the lake bottom. Monique waited, watching it bob, her hands clutched tightly against her chest. She stood there until the ripples were gone, until the suitcase was nothing more than a dark, vague shape blending into the shadows near the far bank. Only then did the rigidity leave her. She got back into the sedan, her movements now hurried, almost frantic. She didn't look back. She reversed fast, spun the car around, and was gone, leaving only the smell of dust and the echo of the engine. I waited, 5 minutes, maybe 10, hidden in the brush until I was certain she wouldn't return. When I finally stepped out, my legs were shaky, and the cold was suddenly irrelevant. The lake looked calm, deceitfully still, as if it had swallowed the truth without much of a tremor. My gaze was fixed on the spot where the brown shape had disappeared. That suitcase, I knew, contained something more than clothes. It contained her connection to Owen and her desperation to destroy it. I felt an icy clarity take hold, silencing the messy noise of grief. For the first time since Owen died, I had a purpose. I wasn't just mourning, I was witnessing. And I was now part of a secret that felt far colder than the midnight air. This wasn't just my daughter-in-law throwing away old memories. This was a deliberate, secretive burial. The question hammered against the inside of my skull. What was she so desperate to erase? The silence of the night offered no comfort, only a profound sense of wrongness. The truth was out there, floating in the dark. It just needed someone to retrieve it. I had to wait for the morning light. I couldn't risk the reflection of my flashlight on the water. I had to be patient, meticulous, and just as quiet as she was. I walked home. The image of that heavy, sinking suitcase burned into my mind. I didn't sleep at all. Every creak of the old floorboard sounded like a warning. I replayed the scene countless times. The anxiety in her eyes, the force of the throw, the way she refused to leave until the secret was hidden. It solidified my conviction. This wasn't an accident. This was a cover-up. The weight of that knowledge was heavier than any suitcase. I knew deep down that the moment she drove away, she signed a confession. All I had to do was prove what she confessed to. That single object floating in the dark held the key to my son's final hours, and I needed to retrieve it without anyone knowing I was there. The thought of confronting her now was tempting but useless. I needed proof. I needed the case. The rising sun, I hoped, would be my silent partner. I needed to move with the calculated stealth of a woman who has nothing left to lose but the final memory of her son. The emotional shock of the sighting had already worn the edge of my sorrow, replacing it with something harder, something capable of seeking justice. I would wait. I would watch. I would not fail. What would you have done if you saw your daughter-in-law do that in the dark? The first light of dawn brought a thick gray fog that rolled across the water like spilled milk. I made my way back to the lake, making sure my walk looked casual like any older woman out to greet the sunrise. I wore my rubber boots and carried a thermos, playing the part of the tranquil early riser. But inside, I was coiled wire. My heart hammered against my ribs, a loud, trampling drummer trying to warn the world. The suitcase was still there. The lake hadn't been a willing accomplice. It had drifted a few feet, resting half submerged in the damp mud and matted cattails near the shallow bank. It looked heavier now, waterlogged and defeated, but stubbornly visible. I approached cautiously, my gaze sweeping the surrounding area for any sign of another car or a person watching. The silence of the morning felt fragile, ready to shatter at the slightest misstep. I knelt down, the cold mud immediately seeping through the knees of my trousers. The smell was earthy and rotten, decaying leaves, stale water, and the faint metallic scent of the old leather. I reached for the handle. My hands were already trembling, not just from the cold, but from the immense gravity of what I was about to touch. The leather handle was stiff, slick, and slimy to the touch. It took all my strength to drag the weight up out of the mud. I braced my feet and pulled, a rough sound escaping my throat. The case gave way with a sickening squelch, tearing free from the thick mud. I dragged it onto the dry grass, rolling it over onto its flat back. The latches were old and rusty, but they held fast. I had to dig a flat river stone out of the dirt to pry them open. The first latch snapped back with a sharp crack. The second one required more leverage. And when it finally gave, the sound felt louder than the gunshot I imagined it should have been. I held my breath, hesitating for a long moment before lifting the lid. I felt a profound sense of intrusion, a violation not just of Monique's privacy, but of the peace of my own son's memory. I touched the cold, damp fabric of the sweatshirt. The emotional memory flashback hit me like a physical blow. Owen's last day alive. He'd been laughing, joking about the ridiculous tie he had to wear for a business meeting. He'd kissed me goodbye on the cheek, a quick, familiar brush of stubble, promising to call later. The memory was vibrant, painful, and terrifyingly close. It was a normal day leading into an abnormal, sudden death. And now, seeing these discarded relics, these personal, irreplaceable artifacts, something icy and definite settled over the pain. This wasn't random grief. This wasn't cleaning out a closet. Monique hadn't thrown away generic junk. She had thrown away the physical evidence of her shared life with Owen, the very items that would naturally be kept close and cherished by a grieving spouse. The shock wasn't that the suitcase was wet, but that she had actively sought to destroy these things. The truth hit me with a force that momentarily stole my vision. This was a deliberate attempt to cut all ties, to eliminate every trace of her life with him. She was erasing a chapter, attempting to wipe the slate clean with the dark water of Willow Creek. It was a cold, calculated move, the kind that screamed preparation, not heartache. The evidence was right here, wet and ruined, but potent. The grief I had carried for months was now being weaponized by this sudden, brutal clarity. The idea that she could have loved him and then tried to erase him in this way was a contradiction too large to ignore. It demanded
an answer, an explanation that only pointed to one terrible conclusion.
She was not a grieving widow. She was a secret keeper. The initial pain gave way to rage, a hot, liquid fury that burned away the last remnants of my naive trust. She had played the grieving widow, accepted our condolences, and stood stoically at the gravesite, all while plotting to discard his memory in the middle of the night. My hands, still shaking, began to sift through the ruined contents. I found his favorite fountain pen, the nib corroded by the water. I found his old, heavy watch, the glass fogged with condensation. Every item was a voice, whispering the same accusation. And then I saw the envelope, torn but still legible. It was tucked deep into the lining, protected slightly by the damp cotton of a t-shirt. It wasn't a love letter or an old receipt. It was a stiff, business-grade paper, and the name on it was impossible to miss. It was the name of the insurance company. My blood went cold, not from the lake water, but from the sudden knowledge that this wasn't just about memory. This was about money. Monique was not just moving on. She was liquidating. The faint, legible letters on the envelope felt like the first line of a confession written in black ink. The envelope confirmed my darkest fear. Owen's death wasn't just a loss. It was a transaction. This single piece of paper salvaged from the mud was the first concrete piece of proof I needed to prove she was lying. The shock of finding his possessions was nothing compared to the shock of seeing that specific piece of documentation. I carefully peeled the envelope away from the damp cotton. It was brittle and fragile, the corners softened by the water, but the content was unmistakable. A final notice from Apex Life and Trust. Inside, the document was folded and creased, a water stain obscuring most of the text. But the names were clear. Owen's signature, and next to the beneficiary line, the name Monique, written in a looping script. My own name, which I knew had been the primary beneficiary since Owen first bought the policy years ago, was scratched out crudely in a hurried hand. It looked like someone had tried to erase it with the edge of a fingernail, tearing the thin paper slightly in the process. The realization settled like a block of ice in my chest. She didn't just inherit the money, she made sure of it. This wasn't a policy Owen had recently changed. He wasn't the kind of man to scratch out his mother's name without a conversation. He handled things methodically. This was forgery, a cheap, rushed job done after the fact, or perhaps just before. It meant she hadn't just wanted him gone, she had engineered the financial outcome. My hands went still, clutching the torn paper like it was a live wire. All the messy, complicated feelings of loss evaporated, replaced by a singular, focused objective: exposure. Inner guilt hit me then, sharp and brutal. Was I so blind I let a viper into my home? I had welcomed her, a beautiful, charming young woman who seemed to stabilize my restless son. I had trusted her entirely. I had defended her quiet behavior after his death as noble sorrow. Every kind gesture, every sad-eyed look she had given me was now recast as a cynical performance. The shame of my foolish trust was almost as debilitating as the pain of losing Owen. I felt exposed, humiliated by my own maternal optimism. This woman hadn't just taken my son, she had manipulated my grief for profit. I put the documents inside the thermos to protect them, snapping the lid shut. I left the suitcase exactly where it was, let the lake reclaim the rest. I had what I needed, the motive and the proof that she was actively hiding something. I walked back. The path that had seemed merely cold an hour ago now felt like a war zone. I needed a plan. I couldn't go to the police yet. The evidence was circumstantial. A forged scratch on a wet document, a suitcase of discarded memories. She would deny it, call me a grieving, delusional mother, and destroy the real proof before anyone took me seriously. I vowed to find the truth quietly, moving beneath her radar until the moment I had an undeniable case. I spent the next 2 days reorganizing my life around this quiet hunt. I became meticulous, cautious, turning my house into a secure operations center. I didn't tell a soul. Then, a pattern interrupt. Monique called. Her voice was bright, almost chirpy, completely lacking the dull edge of protracted sorrow. "Elise, I'm in town, just picking up some things. Would you like me to drop off some freshly baked apricot cookies? I miss seeing you." I looked at the insurance document spread out on my kitchen counter, drying beneath a lamp. I pictured her calm, smiling visit, the sharp contrast between her fake sweetness and the monstrous reality I now possessed. "That would be lovely, dear," I replied, my voice steady, my stomach churning. "Do come by." I had to see her. I had to face the viper, but I couldn't let her know I had been bitten. The game had changed. It was no longer about closure. It was about justice, served cold and slow. I packed away the evidence and wiped down the counter. When she walked through that door, I needed to look like the same trusting, sorrowful mother she expected to see. I had to become the master of my own deception. It was the hardest role I had ever played, forcing kindness to flow from a heart full of corrosive rage. I would watch her sip my tea and smile, all the while knowing the secret she had buried at the bottom of Willow Creek. That morning, I polished the handle of my front door until it gleamed. It felt like preparing a stage for a terrible, intimate drama. I would let her play her role, but I would control the script. The next step was observing her behavior under pressure, looking for the tell that would break her composure. The cookies were probably store-bought, a last-minute gesture to maintain the illusion. The thought brought a cold, small smile to my face. I was ready. Monique arrived precisely at 2 o'clock. She carried a bouquet of bright yellow tulips and a box of what looked like cookies from the bakery downtown. Fake sweetness, professionally packaged. She air-kissed my cheek, a quick, dry touch that felt utterly meaningless, and settled onto the couch, crossing her long legs with an ease that belonged to someone entirely without a conscience. "Elise, you look tired," she said, her voice dripping with concern. "Are you taking your vitamins? You know Owen worried about you." Owen worried about you. The phrase was a dagger dipped in sugar. I made myself smile, offering her the chipped porcelain teacup Owen had given me years ago. "I'm fine, dear. Just the quiet. It's hard to adjust." I watched her hands as she accepted the cup. They were steady. Too steady. I tried to remember the nervous drumming I'd seen on the steering wheel 2 nights ago. If she was stressed, she hit it flawlessly. The dialogue was layered with double meaning, a conversational minefield that only I knew we were walking through. "I decided to finally clear out some of Owen's heavy suits," she sighed, taking a delicate sip of tea. "It's just too much to keep staring at them in the closet, you know?" Lies. I thought of the suitcase. You didn't clear out suits. You tried to throw away the pieces of his life that held memories. "I understand," I replied, my voice soft. "It takes time to let go of their things." I gave her a long, lingering look. Some things are harder to let go of than others. She didn't flinch. "Oh, absolutely, but it helps to focus on the future." She then leaned in conspiratorially. "Speaking of the future, I actually came across that old life insurance document, just sorting through the important papers. It was a mess. Owen was never organized with those things." I held my breath. This was the trap. A mess. Yes, well, I had to call the company just to confirm the details. It was so confusing who was even listed. But it's done now. She waved a dismissive hand. "The paperwork is finalized." The fatal subtle reveal came next, casual and devastating. She paused, nibbling at a cookie, and said, "I'm just waiting on the payout check now. It should be here any day." The payout check! It hadn't even arrived, yet she spoke about it with the certainty of a woman who had already spent the money. She spoke about it as if it was a delivery from Amazon, not the blood money from a man whose death she had orchestrated. Owen had been dead for 3 months, and those policies took time to process. For her to be counting the minutes until the check arrived, for her to bring it up unprompted, it was a monstrous admission. She knew something only the dead should have known. I managed to take a shaky sip of tea, swallowing the metallic taste of my own rising gorge. "That would be a relief," I whispered, forcing myself to look concerned rather than accusing.
"With everything you've been through?" "It is," she agreed, her smile widening. "It allows me to, finally get some closure. Owen always wanted me to be comfortable. Owen wanted me to be comfortable. I felt the hatred solidify in my heart. She was using his memory as a shield, justifying her greed with his non-existent wishes. I realized her composure wasn't bravery. It was pure narcissism. She truly believed she was untouchable. She was enjoying the performance, enjoying the sweet, fake validation of her false grief. The entire afternoon became an exercise in pain. I sat there, listening to her plans, move to a new apartment, perhaps a new car, all purchased with the money she had stolen from Owen's last breath. I watched every subtle movement of her eyes, every flicker of her expression, searching for a single sign of guilt. I found none. Only an irritating, smug self-satisfaction. She was a master of disguise, a creature cloaked in cheap sorrow. I nodded, asked innocuous questions about her job, and kept the conversation focused on the superficial. The truth was hidden in plain sight, and only I could see the monster beneath the flowers and cookies. I waited until she finally stood up, thanked me profusely for the tea, and promised to call soon. As I watched her sedan pull away, leaving a swirl of dust on my driveway, I made a silent vow. I would not allow her future to begin. Her future belonged to the past she was trying to bury. 2 days later, I went to the bank. I didn't go to First National, Monique's bank. I went to my own, Civic Trust. Under the pretense of checking my pension status, I needed to appear unremarkable. This entire operation depended on my becoming a shadow, an ordinary elderly woman running predictable errands. I spoke to the teller, a kind young woman named Brenda, about my quarterly dividends, nodding along to her jargon. As Brenda sorted my paperwork, a small pink deposit slip fluttered onto the floor from the adjacent station. It was a private cubicle used by a bank officer, but it was currently empty. Brenda didn't notice. I did. It was an involuntary motion, a sharp, targeted reflex that came from days of quiet vigilance. I reached down, my hands moving fast and low, a movement entirely out of character for my typical measured pace. My fingers closed around the paper. I pretended to tie my shoe, unfolding the slip in my lap, shielded by the counter. It wasn't a standard receipt. It was a detailed printout of recent transactions for a premium account. The account holder's name was redacted, but the last 4 digits of the account number, scribbled on the top corner, matched the numbers I had seen on Monique's mortgage statement years ago. I risked a quick glance at the line item at the bottom. The date was 3 weeks after Owen's death. The description was a simple code, LI policy payout, and the amount. My vision blurred momentarily. I had to read the number 3 times to process it. It was the exact figure Owen had estimated his life insurance payout would be, a figure he had mentioned to me years ago during a financial planning discussion, a number I had committed to memory. The deposit perfectly matched his life insurance policy amount. Elise's emotions conflicted, pain, rage, disbelief. The blood drained from my face, leaving a cold, waxen mask. This wasn't just speculation or suspicion based on the torn envelope. This was a direct, undeniable link. The money had landed, the transaction was complete. Monique was financially whole, and Owen was a non-factor. Pain and rage wrestled inside me. The pain was for Owen, for the finality of his loss being tied to such a sordid, transactional end. The rage was for Monique, for her audacity, her cruel indifference to the life she had ended. Disbelief was the weakest emotion, quickly crushed by the overwhelming evidence in my hand. I tucked the deposit slip into my pocket, folding it into a tiny square. Brenda returned with my paperwork, apologizing for the wait. "All sorted, Elise, and you're doing just fine," she said cheerfully. I managed a strained smile, thanked her, and walked out, moving on autopilot. Once outside, standing on the sun-baked sidewalk, the world seemed entirely different. The colors were too bright, the traffic noise too loud. I felt a complete, cold severance from the normal world, standing on the outside of a reality I no longer belonged to. This wasn't grief anymore. This was a moral fight, a personal vendetta against a person who had weaponized trust and love. I found a quiet park bench and sat down, pulling the slip out. I stared at the numbers, the cold, stark language of betrayal. The money was the proof. It was the destination she had been driving toward the night she ditched the suitcase. That suitcase was the attempt to hide the history. This bank slip was the proof of the successful robbery. I remembered the words a therapist once used when I was dealing with a minor family squabble. Some women wear grief like jewelry, only to hide their greed. Monique wore it like a diamond necklace, brilliant and heavy, drawing the tension away from the empty cavity where her heart should have been. The guilt I felt earlier for trusting her was replaced with steel. I had been foolish, yes, but she had been criminal. My focus had to shift entirely from mourning to hunting. The revelation hardened my resolve. I had a forged document and a confirmed payout. The next step wasn't confrontation, it was preparation. I needed to confirm those odd symptoms Owen had shown. I needed to look into the accident itself. I knew exactly where to go next, and I knew I couldn't afford to be just Elise anymore. I had to become the quiet, relentless force of retribution. The thought didn't bring peace, but it brought intense, terrifying focus. I would not rest until Monique's calculated calm was shattered and the justice Owen deserved was finally served. I folded the bank slip, pressing the creases sharply with my thumb, a small act of violence that calmed the storm in my soul. I was ready to revisit the past she thought she had buried forever. With the bank slip secure in my lockbox next to the insurance document, I had motive and confirmation of the reward. Now I needed the how. I needed to look beyond the official story of Owen's accident. My mind went back to the weeks leading up to his death. He'd been tired always, not just the stress of work, but a deep physical exhaustion. He'd complain of a fuzzy head, a strange, persistent lethargy. We dismissed it as burnout, perhaps a low-grade cold. Monique had been relentlessly reassuring, always saying, "He just needs to rest, Elise. He's working too hard." Now her words sounded less like comfort and more like misdirection. The official report stated Owen lost control of his car on a winding road late one night. Weather was cited as a factor, but I knew that road. Owen drove it every day. He was a cautious driver, almost overly so. The symptoms, the timing, the insurance payout, none of it lined up with a simple mistake. It smelled of premeditation. I drove to the county coroner's office, a sterile concrete building that always felt oppressively quiet. I approached the reception window, carefully composing my expression into one of quiet, respectful sorrow, the role I knew best. I asked to see Owen's final report. The clerk, a young man with a tired look, typed away for a moment. He looked up, his brow furrowing. "I'm sorry, ma'am. The file is marked closed and sealed. It states the next of kin, Monique, requested no further contact regarding the case." My heart sank, but I forced my voice to remain even. "I understand, but I am his mother. I was simply hoping to read the physician's summary, just for my own peace. The accident was so sudden." I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice to a conspiratorial whisper, allowing the grief to finally bleed into my tone. "It's hard to accept when you weren't there." The clerk hesitated. He genuinely seemed sympathetic. He recognized my type, the mother who needs one last detail to finally put the memory to rest. He glanced at the empty hallway, then back at the screen. "Look, I can't officially open the case for you, but the summary is pretty standard. Just wait one moment." He walked back into the archives, and I stood there, every muscle tense. He returned with a copy, not the original, but a printout. He quietly slipped it across the counter, pushing it beneath the stack of brochures. "Keep this private, ma'am. It's just the summary. No photos. Please don't tell anyone where you got it." I thanked him, my throat thick with gratitude. I walked out and straight to my car, not stopping until I was miles away at a quiet spot overlooking the city. I unfolded the paper. The summary was indeed mostly standard: blunt force trauma, cause of death clearly the crash. But then, near the bottom, listed under toxicology notes, was the detail that turned my stomach to ice: traces of a non-prescription sedative detected in the bloodstream. The report chalked it up to
likely self-medication for stress, a common footnote in routine accident reports. But for me, that trace was a blazing signpost. A sedative. Owen hated taking pills, even for a headache. The fuzzy heads, the constant exhaustion. It wasn't burnout. It was an enforced lethargy. Monique had been dosing him, slowly and subtly, until the night she ensured he was too impaired to drive the winding road safely. The realization didn't just crash over me. It destroyed the entire foundation of my world. She didn't lose him in an accident. She sent him there herself. The truth was not that Owen was unlucky. The truth was that he was poisoned. I sat there, gripping the wheel until my knuckles were white. The paper shook in my hand. Monique was not just a greedy widow. She was a calculated killer. The image of her, air-kissing me, of her calm smile as she spoke of the payout check, brought a fresh wave of blinding fury. She had slipped the poison, cashed the check, and now she was moving on to a new life with the profits. I looked at the city below, its lights twinkling with false innocence. I was alone, holding the only real evidence of a crime that the official world had already forgotten. The police wouldn't see the connection between the subtle sedative and the heavy-handed forgery. I had to build the entire bridge myself. The weight of that knowledge was colossal, but it also granted me absolute clarity. My revenge would not be messy. It would be precise. I decided then and there that I would not simply seek justice. I would manufacture the perfect, inescapable trap. My son's memory demanded it. I folded the report with meticulous care and added it to the lockbox. The hunt was over. The planning had begun. I isolated myself, needing absolute silence to construct the framework of my revenge. The coroner's report had given me the definitive piece, the sedative. It confirmed the motive, insurance, and the method, impaired driving. I replayed every memory of Owen's final weeks, fitting the pieces together like cold, broken glass. The puzzle was complete, and the picture was grotesque. Monique, meanwhile, was oblivious. The payout was secured, the past buried in the lake. She was moving fast, too fast. I tracked her through social media, a necessary evil. She was now openly engaged to Evan, a wealthy developer she'd met barely a month after Owen's funeral. Photos showed them on trips, laughing, their hands linked. Evan seemed to be everything Owen was not: loud, ostentatious, and seemingly shallow. He was a perfect target for a woman interested only in the financial future. We've all seen people move on too quickly after tragedy, but this one felt like betrayal. Community building engagement, rule number 8. It wasn't just fast. It was a flagrant dismissal of Owen's existence. It confirmed her complete lack of attachment and her absolute focus on acquisition. Evan was merely the next, larger policy. The thought gave me chills, and also a critical advantage. She was overconfident. She thought her life had started, completely unaware that I was preparing the final, closing chapter of her old one. I decided, if justice won't come, I'll bring it myself. The plan began with a phone call.
I reached out to Lionel, Owen's best friend since childhood. Lionel was now a sharp, methodical detective in the municipal police, but he was currently working a desk job across state lines. He was the one person I trusted entirely, a man who saw the world in facts and evidence. I didn't tell him everything, not yet. I only asked if he could take a short, unscheduled vacation and come stay with me. I told him I had found some unsettling facts about Owen's final days, things that didn't feel right. He agreed immediately. "I'll be there by Friday, Elise," he said. "Don't touch anything. Don't say anything to anyone." I spent the remaining time planning the trap. It had to be intimate, public enough for her to feel cornered, and entirely impossible for her to escape from once the evidence was presented. A public confrontation would allow her to deny and flee. A private, staged event, where the evidence was slowly revealed by someone she didn't expect, was the only way to crack her composure. The event needed a perfect cover. I settled on Sunday dinner. A family meal, a gesture of peace and continuity. It would be the final time she sat in my home as Owen's widow. I called Monique next. Her voice was giddy. She was already focused on her new life with Evan. "Monique, dear," I said warmly, "I know things have been hectic, but I would love to have you and Evan over for a quiet dinner on Sunday, a proper chance for me to meet him. Owen would want that." She agreed instantly, pleased by the apparent blessing of her new relationship. The monster, completely assured of her victory, walked willingly into the cage. The detail of bringing Evan was perfect. His presence would only heighten her sense of security, and his own reaction would be an essential variable. Symbolic prep scene. I started preparing my son's favorite meal, slow-cooked rosemary lamb, just the way he liked it. The cooking felt sacred, a ritual of remembrance and impending vengeance. As I chopped the vegetables, I practiced my lines, rehearsing the small, devastating gestures I would make at the dinner table. Every knife stroke, every sprinkle of salt was a piece of the trap. I meticulously prepared the final evidence package, combining the bank slip, the insurance form, and a clean printout of the toxicology report, knowing exactly where I would hide it. The hours ticked by slowly, each one a second hand on a bomb counting down. But I was calm. The chaos of grief was gone. In its place was the cold, focused calculation of revenge. I had the killer dining at my table, and I had the detective ready to deliver the final verdict. I set the table, meticulously arranging 3 places, one for me, one for Monique, and one for the oblivious Evan. The 4th place, Owen's, remained empty, but his spirit would be the guest of honor. By the time dessert was served, one of us would be in handcuffs. Lionel arrived Friday afternoon, looking older, tired, and more reserved than the playful young man who used to raid my cookie jar. He was still Owen's friend, though, and his loyalty shone through the professional fatigue. I didn't waste time on small talk. I led him straight to my secure operations center, the guest room locked and sealed. I laid out the contents of the lockbox on the bed, the stained insurance document with the crude scratch-out, the pink bank deposit slip, and the toxicology report showing the trace sedative. I showed him the timeline I had painstakingly created, logging Owen's symptoms against Monique's increasing reassurance that he was just stressed. I watched Lionel's face as he read. The polite, professional mask slowly fractured. He went from humoring a grieving mother to seeing a calculated murder. He handled the toxicology report with the reverent care of someone touching evidence that should have been found months ago. He connected the sedative trace to the clumsy forgery immediately. "This is strong, Elise," he admitted, low and tight, "but it's weak on jurisdiction and chain of custody. If we just hand this to the local force, Monique will hire a defense attorney who will tear it apart, claim you're fabricating evidence out of grief. They'll point to your own involvement, even if it's just pulling the suitcase out of the lake." His clarity confirmed my own fears. We couldn't play by the rules she had already broken. We had to force her hand, make her confess, or at least force a reaction that could be legally witnessed. "That's why I need you," I said simply. "I've set the scene. She's coming for dinner on Sunday with her fiancé, Evan. You're going to join us, pretending to be the old family friend who just happened to be in town." Lionel leaned back, considering the danger of the plan. A forced confession at a dinner table? That's messy. "It's the only way to get her to crack before she destroys the rest of the evidence," I countered. "She is overconfident. She thinks she has won. We shatter that certainty in a controlled environment." We finalized the details of the trap. The centerpiece would be the donation box. I took an elegant mahogany box Owen had used for cufflinks. I put a few worthless trinkets
On top, a cheap tie, an old business card, items that signaled disposal rather than memory. Beneath the lining, I carefully placed the 3 critical documents: the bank slip, the insurance form, and the toxicology report. The plan was simple. During dessert, I would present Monique with the box. "I thought you should have these last few items of Owen's," I would say, "to help you move on completely." The box itself wasn't the trap. The trap was the assumption she would deny the gravity of what was inside and simply put it aside. Lionel's role was crucial. He had brought official frozen account orders with him from his jurisdiction, a piece of evidence that would signal to Monique that the authorities were already involved, even if local police weren't. He also arranged for a plainclothes officer, a contact he trusted who was technically off duty, to be stationed in the city parking lot across the street, ready to move if Lionel gave the signal. They would be listening to a body wire Lionel would wear. We practiced the dialogue, working through every possible angle of Monique's denial. We had to anticipate her moves, her lies, her calculated charm. Lionel practiced the exact moment he would interrupt, the line he would deliver that would freeze her mid-lie. It was about creating a moment of pure shock where her mask would drop. The cooking became a strange, meditative process. I chopped the rosemary, seasoned the lamb, and folded the napkins with a kind of serene finality. The act of preparing Owen's favorite meal felt like a prayer for his soul, a promise that his final hours would not be dismissed as a simple accident. The house was spotless, every detail controlled. I even bought a new lace tablecloth, projecting an image of comfortable, conventional grief. The tension was a constant low hum beneath my skin. I knew that walking into Sunday dinner meant putting myself at risk. I was confronting a killer who had already shown her complete lack of empathy and her capacity for methodical violence. But the thought of her smiling across the table, enjoying the spoils of her crime, was more terrifying than any personal danger. I looked at the dark wood of the dining table, the scene of so many happy family dinners. It was now ready to become a court of last resort. My hands were steady. My resolute was absolute. This was more than revenge. This was a mother's last desperate act of protection. The knowledge that Lionel was my only anchor, the quiet assurance of his presence, was the only thing holding my facade together. Everything hinged on the precision of the next 24 hours. If you're still not subscribing, what's holding you back? Sunday evening. The clock ticked toward 7, and the atmosphere in the house was thick, not with the steam of cooking, but with pressure. Lionel was already there, playing the part of the casual visitor. He was dressed in a simple, quality sweater, his body wire discreetly tucked into his shirt pocket. He looked relaxed,
but his eyes were sharp, missing nothing. When Monique and Evan arrived, the contrast was immediate. Evan was loud, confident, filling the quiet space with booming laughter and expensive cologne. He was the picture of success, oblivious and basking in Monique's reflected light. Monique herself was stunning. She wore a sleek silver dress that glistened under the chandelier, an obvious display of her new life. She looked triumphant. She hugged me with a practiced, shallow warmth. "Elise, everything smells wonderful," Monique chirped, already taking charge of the conversation. "You know, Evan and I are thinking of renovating our kitchen. Nothing this cozy, of course. More modern." Evan nodded, throwing his arm around Monique possessively. He was entirely taken with her, his affection genuine and blinding. He spent the first 20 minutes talking about his investments, oblivious to the history and the crime sitting right next to him. I watched Monique's eyes flicker every time Evan spoke, not with love, but with calculation. She had upgraded, and she wanted me to know it. The cooking became a strange masterclass in control. I maintained the role of the frail, slightly nostalgic mother. I steered the conversation to Owen occasionally, watching Monique navigate the emotional turns with detached professionalism. She would sigh on cue, use a respectful tone, and immediately pivot back to Evan's latest real estate deal. Lionel played his part flawlessly, nodding and contributing technical, non-committal comments, slowly building Monique's confidence that he was simply a polite guest. We moved to the coffee and dessert phase. My heart was a frantic bird against my ribs. This was the window. I served the apple tart, Owen's favorite, and then slowly, deliberately, I brought out the mahogany box. "Monique, I wanted to give you this. It's some of Owen's old business things I just couldn't part with until now. I thought they might help you finally clear the last bit of clutter so you can focus on your new life with Evan." I pushed the box across the table toward her. Evan smiled. "That's very thoughtful, Elise. See, honey, just let go of the past." Monique's smile was fixed. She picked up the box, her eyes lingering on the heavy wood. She set it down immediately, as if the weight was suddenly too much. She didn't open it. She just patted the lid dismissively. "Oh, you are sweet. I'll go through it later. Thank you, Elise." "No," I said, my voice cutting through her polite facade. It was a single, clean sound. And the entire room turned silent. The air crackled. "Monique." "Open it now, Monique. There's something inside I need you to see." She hesitated. For the first time all night, I saw the fear beneath the polish. Her eyes flickered to Evan, who looked confused, then back to me. "Elise, it's just old papers. It can wait." "It cannot wait," Lionel interjected, his voice losing its friendly tone and adopting the hard cadence of a police officer. "Monique, can we talk about this signature?" He reached into the box, pulling out the centerpiece, the insurance document. He pointed to the crudely scratched out section, the one where your mother-in-law's name was crossed out and yours was written over it. It looks to an untrained eye like forgery. Shock scene. The room turned cold. Evan's face, which had been bright with oblivious confidence, drained instantly. He looked at Lionel, then at me, then at the document in Lionel's hand. Monique's smile finally cracked. The silver dress suddenly looked like armor that was too tight. She snatched the document, crumpling it instinctively. "This is insane!" she shrieked, her voice high and uncontrolled. "Elise, what is this? I cleaned out the closet weeks ago. You're tampering with my things. You're grieving and disturbed, and you're trying to ruin my life." Evan finally spoke, his voice quiet, disbelieving. "Monique, is that true? Is that an insurance form?" She ignored him, focusing only on me, hatred blazing in her eyes. "You think I did something? He was tired. He was working too much. He lost control. You need help."
Lionel didn't flinch. He produced the bank slip, holding it up like a flag of defeat. And this, Monique, a deposit slip showing the life insurance payout dated 3 weeks after his death, that's remarkably fast for a policy with irregularities in the beneficiary designation, wouldn't you say? Monique lunged for the bank slip, a wild panicked movement. Lionel blocked her with a movement so fast it was shocking. She was cornered, the evidence laid bare, her fiancé watching in horror. Her carefully constructed world was collapsing around the dessert plate. This was the moment of ultimate exposure. Her facade was gone, replaced with pure, desperate fury. Monique didn't surrender. She counterattacked with venom. The calm, sweet woman dissolved entirely, revealing a desperate, vicious predator. She was no longer talking to the police or to her fiancé. She was talking directly to me, the source of her downfall. "You old fool," she screamed, her face contorted, her voice raw. "You think you're smart? You're delusional. You'll die alone, just like your son. You pushed him away your entire life. He drank himself sick trying to escape you." It was a monstrous accusation, designed purely to inflict maximum pain. I absorbed it calmly. The years of quiet dignity protected me from her baseless cruelty. My grief was real. Her performance was the thing that was fake. "You killed him once," I said, my voice steady, filled with a quiet, undeniable conviction. I reached for the toxicology report, pointing to the line listing the sedative. "You didn't lose control. He was impaired. He was poisoned. He crashed because you made him too dizzy, too lethargic to drive safely. You engineered his death for
the money in that bank slip." Evan pushed back from the table, his chair scraping loudly across the wooden floor. He looked physically ill, staring at Monique as if she were a stranger who had suddenly invaded my home. "Poisoned?" he whispered, the disbelief finally giving way to horror. "Monique, what did you do?" She turned on him instantly, her voice dripping with scorn. "Shut up, Evan. You're useless. You're just another trust fund baby I was going to bleed dry." The admission was swift and brutal, destroying the last vestiges of his faith in her. Lionel took charge. He stepped forward, his expression hard. "The account is frozen, Monique. I have a court order right here." He pulled the document from his pocket. "All the money you stole from Owen is locked up. It's over." She went silent, her eyes darting frantically around the room, assessing escape routes. She saw the front door, then the windows. She saw the end. Then the true shock. A quiet knock came at the front door. Lionel nodded toward it. The door opened, and 2 uniformed officers stepped in, quiet and efficient. They were Lionel's prearranged backup. Monique froze, seeing the police uniforms, the final inescapable wall closing in. She knew the game was lost. The officers approached her calmly. As they reached for her arms, Monique resisted, a final futile effort. She stared at me, her eyes burning with the rage that eclipsed everything. As they gently turned her toward the door, she leaned in, her lips close to my ear, whispering just loud enough for me to hear over the sounds of the officers. "You didn't win, Elise. You never understood Owen. Not truly. You think I destroyed his memory? You have no idea." She straightened up, a malicious final smile splitting her face. She paused at the threshold, forcing the officers to wait one last second. "He wasn't your real son." The whisper hung in the air, a shocking, unexpected blow delivered right when I thought I was victorious. The officers escorted her out, the sound of the front door closing sealing the end of the chapter. Evan stood paralyzed, looking at the empty space where his fiancé had been. Lionel rushed to my side, concerned by my sudden, stunned silence. The physical proof was gone, walking out the door with Monique, but the emotional shrapnel remained. My triumphant closure had just been violently ripped open by a final, desperate lie. Or was it a lie? Subscribe so you're not caught off guard by the next twist. But before she was taken away, she whispered something that shattered me again. The house was quiet again, a deafening silence that settled after the sound of the squad car disappeared down the street. Evan was gone, having fled my home in a pale, stunned silence moments after Monique was led away. Only Lionel and I remained, standing amidst the ruins of our successful trap. The table was a mess of crumpled napkins and dessert dishes, a battlefield of deceit. Lionel was focused, talking into his body wire, confirming the arrest and relaying the collected evidence, the crumpled insurance document, the bank slip, and the toxicology summary. "We got her, Elise. It's over," he said, turning to me with a look of relief and exhaustion. I didn't hear him. The only sound in the room was Monique's final venomous whisper echoing in my mind. "He wasn't your real son." I was momentarily speechless. I felt cold, not from the temperature of the room, but from the sudden, profound knowledge that I had been hiding a secret just as great as the one Monique tried to bury. My shock was not because I believed her lie. My shock was because I knew the truth. I walked slowly to the living room, opening the old mahogany writing desk that belonged to my father. Deep inside a locked bottom drawer, beneath a stack of old property deeds, was a file I hadn't touched in over 30 years. Lionel watched, confused, as I pulled it out. The man who was now a sharp, methodical detective was seeing a side of me he didn't know existed. The paper inside was yellowed and brittle. Adoption finalization order. It was dated shortly after Owen's first birthday. Monique's final blow was calculated to destroy the one thing I knew she treasured most, my identity as Owen's biological mother. I sat down, holding the document. The memory flooded back. The difficult adoption process, the fear of judgment, the decision my late husband and I made to cherish Owen's existence without needing to explain its origins. We decided to keep the secret out of fierce, protective love, determined that blood would never be the definition of our family. I looked at the paperwork, then at Lionel, whose concern had deepened into alarm. "She said he wasn't my real son," I stated, my voice dry and flat. I handed him the file. "She was telling the truth, Lionel, but she didn't know why that truth meant nothing." Lionel read the document, his expression shifting from confusion to profound understanding. He looked up at me, seeing not just Elise, the grieving mother, but Elise, the woman who had built a fierce, unconditional life around the love she had chosen. I felt a sudden fierce pride for the decision I had made decades ago. The lie Monique wanted to expose was based on genetics, on an irrelevant piece of biology. But my truth was based on commitment, on sleepless nights, on scraped knees, and on shared laughter. Monique's cruel revelation was meaningless. It was her last, weak attempt to poison a memory she couldn't kill. My wisdom line came then, simple and absolute. Blood never made us family. Love did. That moment, sitting in the quiet aftermath of the arrest, holding proof of a secret I'd kept for a lifetime, was my true moral victory. Monique had aimed for the one thing she thought she could unravel me, biological legitimacy, but she missed entirely. She hit the bedrock of my true foundation, the strength of chosen love. My certainty, my focus on justice, hadn't been compromised by a momentary genetic technicality. I had pursued Owen's killer out of the deepest, purest form of motherhood. Monique's final wound didn't bleed. It healed. It reaffirmed everything I had ever believed about Owen and our bond. The lie was exposed, but the relationship remained untarnished. The knowledge armed me further, strengthening me for the trial that was to come. I was ready to face the world not just as a prosecutor of a killer, but as a mother who had nothing left to hide. I put the papers away, the heavy mahogany door clicking shut with a finality that felt permanent. The fear was gone, replaced by a quiet, settled determination.
Monique's trial dominated the news for weeks.
The combination of forgery, the cold disposal of the suitcase, and the toxicology report proved impossible to argue against. The state's case was methodical and brutal, thanks in large part to the evidence gathered in my living room, backed by Lionel's official testimony. I sat in the courtroom every day, a quiet, unwavering figure in the front row, forcing Monique to look at the consequences of her greed. The atmosphere in the courtroom was charged, thick with the weight of the community's judgment. Evan testified first, a broken, humiliated man. He recounted Monique's confession at the dinner table, her callous admission that she had only been using him to bleed dry. His testimony effectively sealed her reputation as a calculated predator, stripping away the last illusion of the grieving widow. Lionel then presented the physical evidence. He detailed the sequence: the forged beneficiary signature, the swift payout into Monique's account, and the coroner's report confirming the sedative trace. He spoke with the quiet authority of a detective who knew he was serving justice for his best friend. When Monique's defense attorney tried to introduce the narrative of a delusional mother fabricating evidence, I remained impassive. My calm demeanor and the clear, logical connection of the documents made their arguments sound desperate and weak. The prosecution rested, and the jury deliberation was swift. When the verdict was read, guilty on all counts, a quiet wave of emotion washed over the courtroom. Monique stood rigid, her eyes fixed on the judge, betraying nothing. But as the judge delivered the sentence, her composure finally cracked. Her face went slack, revealing a hollow core beneath the makeup. I did not celebrate. I did not move. I simply watched the justice that Owen had been denied finally arrive. The years of false sorrow and manufactured calm Monique had inflicted on the world were over. I left the courtroom before the media swarm could engulf me. I didn't want their sympathy or their sound bites. My victory wasn't for public consumption. The sight of Monique, defeated and sentenced, brought a strange, complex mix of emotions. There was relief, yes, a profound satisfaction that the monster was contained. But forgiveness? That was a question that lingered, a heavy cloak I couldn't yet shed. The community, however, felt a clear mandate. Would you forgive someone who murdered your child, or let justice speak? I drove home, leaving the noise of the city behind. The trial was over, the verdict was final, but the true work, the work of healing the heart, was only just beginning. The finality of the legal process didn't erase the memory of Owen's final days, or the venom of Monique's last whisper. I had won the battle for his memory, but the war for my own peace was ongoing. I realized that justice, while necessary, was only the beginning of closure, not the end. The money Monique had stolen, the large life insurance payout, was recovered, frozen by Lionel's court order, and eventually returned to Owen's estate. I had no desire to keep it. That money was tainted, the root of a terrible crime, and I knew its presence would only corrupt the peace I had finally found. Instead, I used the stolen funds to start a foundation for families of wrongful deaths. I named it the Owen Fund, choosing to honor his name publicly and turn the source of my pain into purpose. The foundation was designed to help families who couldn't afford private investigators or toxicology experts, the very resources I had to scramble for. I wanted to ensure that no other mother felt the isolated, desperate confusion I had endured. The work was therapeutic. I channeled my methodical focus, the same intensity I used to track Monique's lies, into organizing aid for the lost. I met with other parents, hearing their stories, and found in their shared grief a new, unexpected community. I learned that when you turn pain into purpose, the wound finally closes. The pain was still a part of me, a deep scar, but it no longer defined me. I honored my son's name publicly. The foundation quickly gained traction, becoming a quiet force for good. Every recovered dollar, every successful case the foundation assisted was a tribute to Owen's life and a repudiation of Monique's wicked act. His death, I realized, had forced a dark truth to the surface, allowing a light to be built in its place. The funds which were meant to finance Monique's new life were instead dedicated to preventing others from suffering her betrayal. It was the ultimate satisfying reversal of her intent. My focus was entirely forward, building a legacy of health and vigilance, rather than dwelling in the shadow of my loss. Months passed. The trial was a distant memory, Monique was gone, and the foundation was running smoothly. I maintained my home, but the emotional war room was decommissioned. The lockbox was empty, the documents now safely held by the state. I adopted a new ritual. Every morning now I walk down to Willow Creek. I no longer hide. I simply stand by the water, watching the dawn break over the lake. This morning, the fog was lifting, exactly as it did the morning I pulled that heavy suitcase from the mud. But the feeling was completely different. There was clarity. The air was crisp, clean, and promising. My clothes were dry. My hands were steady. I stood there, not as a woman consumed by grief or plotting revenge, but as a woman who had fought a terrible battle and won. The quiet, settled peace was my reward. I had found justice, reaffirmed the power of unconditional love, and built a legacy for my son. My life had structure and direction again, only now it was pointed toward healing, not hunting. The final lasting thought of Owen was not the crash or the poison or the trial. It was the memory of a 3-year-old boy full of life throwing a rock into this very lake, laughing at the splash. That vibrant memory, untarnished and fierce, was the one that remained. My last line callback was simple. The lake still holds secrets, but not mine anymore. If you were in my shoes, would you have gathered proof or confronted her right away? Tell me below and subscribe so you don't miss the next story of justice served.